We'll then hear from union leaders who oppose the bill. This bill would change pension benefits for current state workers in an effort to reduce the massive unfunded debt facing the state pension system.
Give me an opportunity to come before you and speak today. As the chairman has said, I'm Michael Kerrigan, and I'm the
Excuse me, Mr. Kerrigan, is that
I'm sorry. I'll begin again.
We may have a good electrician in the house, so if you need that, let me know.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today and speak. As the Chairman has said, I'm Michael Kerrigan. I'm the President of the Illinois AFL-CIO. I come today before the committee to speak on behalf of Illinois working families. Public sector employees make up the front lines in educating our children, taking care of the sick and the elderly, guarding prisoners, and keeping us from harm among the multitude of essential everyday tasks that benefit every citizen of our state. The most troubling aspect of the pension reform effort is the fact that elected officials have come and gone and priorities changed. Whether it was corporate tax breaks for new programs, for decades these tax breaks and these programs have been paid for in part by putting off or ignoring pension payments due to these good workers. While I commend the General Assembly and the Governor for the courage in addressing the revenue shortfall, the problem isn't the modest $32,000 or less a year the average public sector worker earned on their retirement. They made their contributions and they deserve an adequate retirement. Pensions have become an issue because they weren't a priority when spending decisions were made over the past decades. Had pensions been adequately funded down through the years, the recent economic downturns experienced on the national, state, and local levels could have been weathered. Also, most of these workers have given up their Social Security benefits, and this has saved the state millions. And these workers have made their payments every time they received a paycheck. Pension reform on the backs of working families is unconscionable and unconstitutional. Last year, when new state workers had their pensions disassembled in less than 20 hours, we were led to believe that the work was done. Our elected General Assembly is now setting a course to break a constitutional promise made 40 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kerrigan. Mr. Bayer, are you going to follow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Henry Bayer. I am the Executive Director of AFSCME Council 31. We represent approximately 40,000 state employees, and we as well represent people who work for Cook County and for the city of Chicago who would also be affected by this legislation. We believe that pension reform is long overdue. We believe that this bill is a week late because this bill is not pension reform. This bill is a bill that masquerades at pension reform and should have been introduced on Halloween Monday of last week. And I'd like to have the opportunity to explain why this is not pension reform. As my colleague, President Kerrigan of the State Fed mentioned, and I think it's important to put it back on the record because I know a lot of the testimony we heard earlier today from the proponents was from the record of last time. I think it's important to repeat that the average pension of a public employee in the state of Illinois is $32,000. 80% of those people have no Social Security. Unless they have private savings, that $32,000 is all that they have to live on. And those same people, over each paycheck that they've received, whether it be from the state or from a school district or from the city of Chicago or from Cook County, most of them, each of their paychecks, more than 8% has been taken out from the first day they were employed to the day that they retired. They have been paying their share. The problem of the pensions is not that they're overly generous. The problem is that there's been underfunding both not only by the state but by Cook County and by Chicago. And we don't need to look beyond our borders to find a model of a system that is well-funded, a system that over 60% of the benefits are paid for not by the employer, not by the employee, but by the return on the investments of that system. And I'm talking, of course, about the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, which covers employees who work for all local governments outside of Chicago and outside of Cook County. The benefits which the people in IMRF receive are comparable to those which people in other systems receive here in Illinois. The amount they pay is comparable to what people receive here in Illinois. But that system doesn't confront the same problems that the TRS, the SURS, SERS are facing. And one would have thought that the architects of this bill might have looked at the IMRF and how that's constructed, how that regime works, to see, well, maybe this model could be adapted to the state, to the city, and to Cook County, and that's how we would do pension reform. That's how most people do it. They look for best practices. Well, what works and what makes it work? And I would argue that what makes the IMRF work is that first it has a funding enforcement mechanism. That is, the system can send a bill, it sends a bill annually to each municipality or county and says, this is how much you owe, and you must pay this as the employer's share of the retirement funding. And if the town or the municipality or the county doesn't send that amount of money, what happens is that the retirement fund has the ability to go to the state, and any monies that are owed to that municipality or county from the state go to the retirement fund. As a result, the IMRF doesn't have that problem. As a result, the employers over the years have been regularly making payments, so they don't have the liability, the unfunded liabilities that we have. There is no such mechanism in this bill that would ensure that indeed the payments that are supposed to be made are being made. One other feature of the IMRF that is unique, as I mentioned, over 60% of the benefits that are paid from the return on investments, is that board is entirely composed of people who are participants in the IMRF. That is, they must either be an active member or a retired member, and they are all elected by the participants in the IMRF. There's no funny business. There's no Stuart Levines appointed by some governor to those boards of trustees. They have elected trustees. They're elected by people who have the most direct in the IMRF, and that is the people who someday hope to retire or are already retired. But is there any such move by the drafters of this bill? There is none. And there's nothing, there's no requirement to ensure that future payments will achieve a full funding level in 30 years. It says, well, that's their goal, but how do we know that they're going to do that? And the Government Accounting Standards Board says you are supposed to achieve full funding within 30 years. So how is that achieved? You do that, one, by determining, well, if you have an $85 billion unfunded liability, how much will we have to put in each year over 30 years to get that unfunded liability paid off? And then what is the normal cost for the pension going forward without the unfunded liability? And the combination of those two are the actuarially required contributions to the system. Now, I served along with a lot of other labor leaders and along with a lot of people from the business community, including Ty Fehner's predecessor as chairman of the Civic Committee, Eden Martin. And the one issue that there was unanimity on, there was certainty on among all members of that committee, business, public, and labor, that, because we were looking at that time only the city pension system, the one thing we all agreed on is that funding must be based on the actuarially required contribution. I remember Mr. Fehner's predecessor pounding the table and insisting we have to have the actuarially required contribution, because anything less than that means you're not paying off your liability. This bill does not have the actuarially required contribution. They've left that out, and this, make no mistake about it, this bill was written by the business community. Someone had said earlier, well, this was designed for the benefit of the members of these pension funds. Well, I would like to see one member of the pension fund who was consulted about the provisions in this bill. I don't know of any. Maybe if there was one, that's probably all there was. But there's several 100,000 people who are covered by these systems. I don't believe that any of them were consulted, and I don't believe that this bill benefits them. Now, one other thing I should say, the authors of this bill, I believe, are on record as saying, well, this bill, people have asked, where's the money going to come from that we are going to be putting in it? The authors of this bill, I believe, I don't think I'm misquoting them, have said publicly, well, they presume that the temporary income tax is going to remain permanent, that is going to remain in place. The sponsor of the bill says he thinks that the temporary income tax should expire in whatever year, 2013, 14, 15, whenever it's supposed to expire. That would, of course, leave a $6 billion hole in the state's budget. So I don't know if this bill as presented by the sponsor presumes that that income tax increase is going to continue, and if he presumes it's not, where we're going to get the money to replace to make the pitch that they claim that they are going to make. So that's, I think, something that needs to be looked at. Another provision in this bill, which I think needs to be looked at more closely, because I know when the first, quote, reform bill was passed that created the second tier, one of the things it did is allowed the Chicago public school systems to lower its contribution to the pension fund for that year, which the pension fund estimated would cost Chicago taxpayers $1 billion over the next 30 years because of that missed payment to the pension fund. This bill says that with respect to the city of Chicago, that they will pay into the pension fund the 2010 levy, and that whatever that dollar amount is, that will be going forward. That will be the amount that the city will be paying going forward. At least that's how I read it. We've only had this bill for a little while, but if you look at the bill, that's what it says. That they're going to take nothing to do with actuarially required contributions, nothing to do with generating any funds. It talks about a dollar amount and leaving the dollar amount where it is. I don't know, maybe just for the next 4 years, perhaps. I don't know why, but I think it's something that needs to be looked at very, very closely. So really the only thing that this bill does, in our view, the big thing that it does is that it raises the amount of money that you're asking teachers and other public employees to pay into the pension fund. You're asking them to keep the same benefit that they would pay at least 50% more than they're currently paying, and in some cases more than 100% more than they're currently paying. Now, the Constitution says that the pensions that people enjoy are a contract, that the state has a contract, and saying, well, we're keeping the contract, you just have to pay more for it. Well, that's like saying if you have a contract to buy a car for $20,000 and you go to pick it up and say, well, it's $30,000. It's not. Well, that's not the same contract. That's a different contract. When you ask people to pay more money, and then let's not kid ourselves, you're not asking to do that voluntarily. If they want to keep their benefit, they have to do it. They have to pay that 50% or 100% more. So that's the big change in this bill, in this from the current law, is you're making people pay more or else have a reduced benefit. And
Are you close to finishing these remarks? Are there any questions as well? So,
I'm going to
do that. The chair would appreciate it.
This is a very important issue, Mr. Chairman.
I'm trying to give everybody a fair say. So,
if I'm taking more time than I'm allotted, I'm sorry, but I really feel that the points I have to make, and maybe the committee will disagree, but you won't know unless you hear them, but I think they're important points to make, because when I think we have to look at this bill, and again, contrary to the claims were made that the unions weren't willing to put any ideas forth. That's not That is untrue. When I sat here at this table last spring and testifying against 512, we expressed a willingness to sit down and negotiate a bill in the same manner that the bills were negotiated in the past for workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, for the Education Reform Bill. That's the kind of negotiations we thought would take place, but those negotiations never took place. This bill was written by the Civic Committee. The rest of us were shut out of the process, and that's why we have the kind of bill that we have. Now, the last time we were here, the chairman of the Civic Committee was Miles White. He's been replaced by James Farrell. James Farrell is retired CEO of Illinois Tool Works. His pension is $1.4 million annually. $1.4 million annually, and this guy is spending his time trying to cut the pensions of public servants, of teachers, of correctional officers, of nurses, of other people who provide vital public services. He wants to cut what is on average a $32,000 pension. I think that takes a lot of nerve on the part of the Civic Committee to come here and say, let's do that. They're asking, well, if every employee wanted to maintain the pension that they currently have, the increase cost to them, remember they're already paying, most of them are already paying over 8% of their salary. The increased cost to them would be $1 billion a year. That's how much more people would have to pay to maintain their benefit. $1 billion more a year. The sponsor of this bill wants to cut business taxes by $500 million a year. And I think this committee has to decide, are they going to be on the side of correctional officers, of teachers and nurses and other middle-class people, or are we going to continue to go down this path in this country of just serving the top 1% of the people who already have too much money? I think you shouldn't do that. I think that's what this bill attempts to do. That's why it's a bad bill, and I hope you'll vote against it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Before Mr. Bodeva speaks, I'm going to let Representative Singer and Representative Winters ask a quick question for Mr. Baker Kerrigan.
Yeah, I just have a point of clarification about the unfunded liability not being paid. I mean, it's my understanding the bill is the reason why we're doing this because we are going to be paying the unfunded liability in such a way where we're not going to be out of business as a state, including your own people. Now, help me, make that point very clear. This is we're taking care of this in this bill. That's
No,
what
you're
we're
not.
doing.
I'm telling you, the only way to take care of the unfunded
Okay,
liability.
I got another question.
Okay.
Number 2, IMRF. I agree there's a calculation of actuarial cost or normal cost that gets paid. But that cost is there no matter what. So again, the bottom line through the cost of this, I'm not saying one thing, the payment is there, but cost is also cost. IMRS is expensive too, and it gets paid, and I know a lot of people.
No, it's not more expensive
I
than
know
these
it's
others.
funded, but it's expensive, and I come from municipalities, so I know there's a lot of argument every year when that bill is paid, how that has to take away from everything else. Number 3, are you telling me that managers for IMRF are better than us, money managers? That's
I
what
don't know
you
about
just
the
said.
money managers.
You just said
I'm just
that
saying that it's a better, I said, no, I'm talking about the trustees. The trustees are all elected, and they hire the money managers. Who's a better money manager? I don't know much about money manager. All I know is we have a system where everybody's elected by annuitants. It's well-funded. Over the years, it's done a good job, and I think it's a good model for us to follow in these other systems.
I guess I just want to make the comment, I think that, TRS and the other ones that are managing the money do a very good job too.
Right, I didn't say they didn't. I just,
Representative Winters.
they don't get enough to invest.
Dave, did you have a question?
This is more of a request than a question, but you continually bring up the figure of $32,000 as the average pension payment. Most people consider, the public wants to compare it against what they would consider a normal, say, Social Security benefits or a pension that they may have earned. Could you in the future guess the average pension of those who have worked a full career, say 30 years, just make an estimate that 30 years would be a full career. Those numbers, I believe, would be very easily accessible. And what I'm asking you to do is to discount somebody who may have worked for the state for 10 years. Because in your 32,000 figure includes people who worked for a very short portion of their earning life for the state, and you fold them in, which has I believe, a very strong effect in holding down the average pension that you quote. So in the interest of the public, if you could give us the next time what a full life earning state employee or teacher would have made, rather than including with them the short-termers, if you will.
Well, okay, I hope there will be a next time. I hope the bill will remain in committee, but I will say that I know now the average, as far as the state employee retirement system is concerned, the average person goes out with 24 years of service. So there aren't that many that, that obviously there are
Well,
some.
half of them less than 24, if the average is 24. What I'm asking is set it at 30.
Right.
I'm trying to give the public
I'll ask
a
the
figure.
SRS. I don't have the information. If they have it, I'll be glad to send it to you
That's what I'm
tomorrow
asking
morning.
for. Thank you.
We have a statement question by Representative Cross.
Thank you. Henry, you and I met 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and you acknowledged, or said to be, you acknowledged there's a problem.
There is. I said that when I testified here last spring.
What's the problem you believe we have?
We have a problem that we have an $85 billion unfunded liability, and we need to deal with how we're going to pay for that.
So we would, I don't want to put words in your mouth, we would agree that being able to keep up with that ramp between now and 2045, because of that high unfunded liability, is going to be very difficult to attain.
Well, it'd be more difficult if we don't extend the income tax. It would be more difficult. If we didn't have it, it would be impossible.
Were you asking, by the way, you said earlier that the sponsors said we should get rid of it. Were you talking about this sponsor or?
I thought you sponsored. I thought this was your amendment. I thought it
It's
was,
across Madigan. I just wasn't sure which
I
sponsor
didn't-
you were talking about.
was that Mr. Madigan? I wonder who that
So,
young guy over there in the front row
all
was.
seriousness, if you and I agree there's a problem, we agree
Right,
there's an
we agree.
$85 billion unfunded liability,
Right.
we agree that the ramp is almost impossible to sustain, what would you do to solve it?
Well, I said, number one, I would say we have to make the actuarially required contribution. If we don't do that, we are not going to close the gap. We're not going to get to the 90%. So that's, and as I understand the bill, and again, we haven't had a long time to analyze it, but I think I'm reasonably confident that there's nothing in this law that requires the state to make the actuarially required contribution. If there is, why don't we state it? So state it. Then number two, how are we going to ensure, and I've been around a long time, you've been around here a long time, we had a ramp that we got off the ramp.
Agreed.
Right?
You and I agree on this.
There was no mechanism saying to the governor and the General Assembly, well, look, you have to pay. Like in the case of the IMRF, they have a mechanism. If you had a mechanism that said whereby the pension funds could say to the state, if the state didn't make the payment, they go to court, whatever, or just send a letter to the comptroller and say, this is the certified amount, send us a check. So that, again, that would ensure that there weren't game. And then number three, we have to identify, well, where's the money going to come from? And when we figure out what the actuarially required contribution would be, and what projected state revenues would be, can we meet it with that? And if not, are there other sources of revenue? Is it gaming revenue that we might get, or whatever? But it's not, there's no manna from heaven here. We're not, it's going to take money.
We happen to agree that
Okay.
we should make the payment, and second, I'd love to find a mechanism that forces us to make the payment. No one's brought one to me.
Well, we haven't been invited. Someone
Henry-
said, you guys didn't put anything on the table. I said, where's the table?
You were in my office in Chicago a month ago. I said, bring me some suggestions. I'm still waiting on it.
Well-
And then let me ask you this. So, assuming we take care of the unfunded liability, and we do nothing else, I think we would all agree that the bleeding, if you will, my terminology, continues. That the unfunded liability would continue because we're not adequately paying for the cost of benefits. What would you say about that?
Well, I would say, number one, the biggest cost of the pensions right now is the unfunded liability. I think is it two-thirds of the cost of the pension now? More than two-thirds of the cost of the unfunded. If we were only talking about the normal cost, we wouldn't be here. We'd all be, we'd be out having dinner or watching a ball game or doing something. We wouldn't be here, believe me. Over two-thirds of the cost are for the unfunded, and that doesn't, and unfortunately, that doesn't go away. The 85, it's like if you got a credit card and you've run up a big bill, so, well, I'm not going to put anything more on my credit card. Well, that's fine, but you still got to pay off what you already owe. And that we're grappling with here.
We agree.
Well,
But,
okay.
and so on that point, no one's offered a suggestion.
Well, I beg to differ a little bit, Representative Cross, because we did have a meeting in Chicago that both you and the Speaker and members of this committee were at, and I believe subsequent to that meeting, you asked us for a framework, and we sent to you a framework that we thought would be the proper framework for discussing a bill that would address the problems I'm talking about tonight. And unfortunately, we never really got in any meaningful way an opportunity to discuss those. Again, I'll renew our offer. I think I can speak for the other unions that have been involved that were at that meeting, that we renew our offer to sit down with you and try to work something out that's fair to everybody, that's equitable to the taxpayers, equitable to our members, and something that the General Assembly can get its arms around. I don't know how many times I have to say it, but I'll repeat it, and we mean it. We think if the parties sat down, we could, I would hope we could, come up with a solution, because if nothing is done, it will collapse of its own weight. We acknowledge that. Something needs to be done. And we're willing to roll up our sleeves and try to get it done. And we just wish that the people who've been designing 512 would have let us in. In fact, when I had breakfast with Mr. Famer, he was gracious enough to buy. He's got a lot more money than we do on our side. I expressed that to him. I said, we'd be glad to sit down with, even with a civic committee in the room. Let them. They got to, just bring their pocketbooks and their wallets, and we'll be glad to.
Henry, let me just say for the record.
If I may interrupt, and you can throw me out, I apologize, but what I told him, I took him to the Chicago Club so he could throw plates and cups at Miles White and Jim Farrell.
Henry, I remain.
That was the one and only time I've been there. I don't want people to think I low life all the time. I'm not going back. I don't know. I just had the address. I just had the address and I showed up because I'm a good soldier and we're trying to get this problem
Henry,
solved.
I don't know where this goes the next days or weeks, but I will always be available as the chief sponsor, with or without other people, to be sitting down with you and Mike and representatives from the IEA and IFT at any time. I thought I'd made that pretty clear. May I keep that open as the sponsor?
I think we don't want to, conduct 8 sets of negotiations. We would like to, do one set of negotiations with the legislative leaders and/or their representatives, and see if we can work something out that everybody agrees to.
I'll volunteer myself as the sponsor.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just real quickly, please.
Sure.
At least twice, if not 3 times, you mentioned that our numbers in 512, or the sponsor's numbers in 512, don't add up as far as addressing the unfunded liability because they don't reach 30 years 100%, which are the GASB regulations, but we're not under that. These numbers are to reach 90% in 2045. So would you agree that the current structure that he has laid out in... One second, please.
Okay, sure. I'm sorry.
The current structure he has in Senate Bill 512 is intended to meet the 90% target in 2045, not the 30% or 30-year 100% target that you had referenced a few times.
I guess my concern is that it may be intended to do that, but the bill says what it says, and it doesn't say you will make. It may turn out that actuarially, maybe it isn't 19 million or whatever billion, whatever that is. It's 20 billion.
Well, I hope that the recent fiscal constraints that the General Assembly has held themselves under would make sure we make those payments going forward. That's enough for now. Mr. Davis?
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Andrew Bodavis. I'm representing the Fraternal Order of Police Labor Council today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for your time. I want to point out a couple of things quickly. First and foremost, I want to be very clear about this. 512, Amendment Number 2, does not make these changes for sworn officers. We do have members that are affected, although the majority of our membership is not. But the reason that we're coming forward today to take a moment of your time is our fundamental concern that this amendment, this bill as amended, is not going to solve the pension problems in the state of Illinois. We're very concerned, as our colleagues are, that this is not a comprehensive reform package. And what happened in 2005, we started with the first reform sort of in modern times, Senate Bill 27 back then. And what happened 5 years later, last year, we came back with another reform. That was 1946. And then following that, we did yet another reform. This one was for our police and fire and some of the other state employees. And all of these reforms were based on the same premise. They reduced benefits. They did not institute any type of rigidity in funding. They did not look at efficiencies in the underlying pension systems. They did not get any of these ideas. All they did across the board was reduce benefits. And so what happened last time, and I'm not trying to suggest that it's the intent of the sponsor to affect these sworn law enforcement personnel that are not affected here, but what we have learned is that even when we are excluded from these bills, because reforms that strictly look at the members' benefits do not produce the desired result and end us up a year later in the same boat, the fundamental concern from the Labor Council is that this is just teeing that up, and that we'll be back when we don't. And we know that we haven't seen any actuarial work from SCRS on our members. We haven't seen, I don't think we've seen any actuarial reports from any of the state systems on this amendment. I'm not sure if the actuary that spoke earlier had a full actuarial report, but it's our fundamental fear that these decisions will be made without these numbers, and when the numbers come after the decisions have been made, they won't prove up to the promised savings, and we'll be back on the table. And next time, it'll be sworn law enforcement personnel, it'll be firefighters, it'll be whomever. But we would like to see this cycle of confusing pension reform with pension reductions, and like our colleagues, have a more comprehensive discussion so that we don't have to come back to the table and defend the sworn officers' pensions next year. We, with the rest of Labor, would like to be part of a general process. And on this individual bill, again, you were kind enough to not include the sworn law enforcement personnel. But we would certainly say that the discussions about funding rigidity that were in the working group, there were several suggestions that were brought up during there, some of them constitutional based, some of them having an IMRF type intercept power that would be granted to the pension funds. These are very good places to start. These are very good ideas. There were other good ideas that were brought up in the pension working group that we think could be incorporated in this, in 512, but we would say that would be a very good place to start.
Thank you. Ms. Bello?
Bucola Bello with the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund. While we have a great deal of respect for the sponsor and the co-sponsor of this legislation, we simply cannot support it. Senate Bill 512, House Amendment 2, does not deal with the concerns and the quintessential needs of the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund regarding mandatory and adequate funding from the Chicago Public Schools Board of Education. In fact, the pension fund is still dealing with the aftermath of Public Act 960889 that allowed the Board of Education to take a 3-year pension holiday, resulting in the direct and deliberate underfunding of the pension fund by $1.2 billion. In addition, it allowed for Chicago property taxpayers to be on the hook for $12 billion over the span of 50 years. During an actuarial report from the pension fund's actuary on August 9th of 2011, he ascertained that the pension contribution in fiscal year 2014 for the Board of Education was going to be $647 million. The Chicago Public Schools Board of Education has made no qualms about the fact that they are facing a $700 million budget deficit and that they have concerns about coming up with the money. Senate Bill 512 does not address the fact that the Chicago Public Schools Board of Education can essentially come back to the legislature for another pension holiday, nor does it require the Chicago Public Schools Board of Education to make mandatory payment. We appreciate Representative Neckrett's comments asking, is there a difference between how the state systems and the Chicago systems are dealing with this particular bill? Well, under Senate Bill 512, we have serious concerns that the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund is going to continue to have to deal with the Board of Education and their lack of funding. So that's one of our main concerns. In addition, under this particular bill, we are dealing with other issues. The Chicago Teachers Pension Fund is dealing with a disparity in funding from the state regarding the Teachers Retirement System, and the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund. In fiscal year 2011, the Teachers Retirement System of Illinois is set to receive $2.5 billion, whereas the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund will not receive any funds at all. So we're dealing with the Chicago Board of Education subsequently not being able to make its payment after the pension year holiday, and this bill does not address it. In addition, we believe that allowing various members or forcing members into tiers that reduce their benefits, we believe it's unconstitutional, and we do not believe that it is good policy. We would expect and hope that if pension reform were to come before this committee and to come before this collective body, that it would take into account the sensitive needs of each fund, particularly the funds within Chicago, notwithstanding Cook County and the city, but the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund, which deals with a different employer that is having financial needs. So in addition to those reasons, as well as other reasons provided in written testimony, we cannot support this bill.
Thank you. Questions for the panel? Speaker Madigan?
I should point out to the panel that the employer, the Chicago Board of Education, actually pays in for the employer's share of the pension.
Right, that is correct.
Districts outside of Chicago basically don't do except for 0.54% of payroll.
That's
Should
correct.
make that point, too.
That's correct. And so Chicago taxpayers are paying double, essentially, to support the Board of Education as well as downstate teachers. Thank
And
you,
I'm
Speaker.
sure Mr. Bayer has a solution to that problem.
As a property owner in the city of Chicago, whose two children both got great educations in the public schools of Chicago, K through 12, I am more than happy to pay my property taxes. I'd be willing to pay more property taxes so that the teachers' pension fund could be properly funded, because it was certainly worth it to me, the Chicago public schools. I can tell you that.
Thank you for that comment. Representative Cross.
I'm sorry, you haven't come to my office to offer any suggestions or criticisms or observations about this bill since January.
We have been working with the Chicago Teachers Union as well as attending the pension working groups. We provided various solutions, and there are some questions that we brought forward again in the written testimony. We're more than willing to set up a separate meeting with you to discuss our proposals, but we've been adamant at the table at the pension working groups.
I guess just for the record, neither of you have offered to me directly any suggestions or proposals to take care of the agreed problem we have in the state of Illinois.
I think that's a mischaracterization. As you know, when we met with you and when we met over at the Blandick building, we made clear that we're willing to sit down and talk as soon as a forum were made available for us to do that. And we did send a framework for the discussions that we thought would have to be discussed in order to come up with a bill that would address the needs of everybody.
Leader Cross, if I may, I will, Minority Leader Cross, I will inform our executive director that it would be advantageous for us to submit our proposals to you as well as continuing to work with any other pension working group meetings that we may have. So I'll make sure to take care of that.
Here's my only point. I've heard everyone say we have a problem. I think that's good, that we've all acknowledged, and more than just you four. I'm not picking anybody. But no one's come to the table and said, here are our ideas. Nobody said, here's a way about it. I happen to agree, Henry, 100% with you that we need to find a way to honor our commitment, to make the payment. 100% agree with you. And I'm looking for that magic way to do that. So that's one of several problems. Bring them to us. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, this has been going on since January of this year. And no one's come into me and said, I don't like 512. Have you thought about doing it this way? Or how about going down this road? And it's hard for us, or me as the sponsor, to negotiate a bill when no one offers an alternative. Would you agree with that?
Well, we'll bring this over to your office tomorrow morning. I think you already have it, but we'll bring it again in case it got lost. And we'll be glad
Henry,
to... No, I'm not trying to be cute. We'll go
I'm
through
not
it.
either. My
We'll
only
sit
point
down
is,
and
if you want to have a real negotiation, you have to say, this is what I like or don't like about 512. How about this? And we talk. Nothing's happening like that.
I thought I tried to address, I didn't go through it every aspect, but I tried, look, it's a 300 and some odd page bill. I first saw it last night about 7 o'clock.
It started in January of this year, Henry. We've had it for 11 months, and no one's offered one thing to me.
Well, I
Not one thing.
I did outline the things that I didn't like, Bill, I think, in my testimony. At least I attempted to.
It's easy to tell us what we don't like.
Well,
Then let's talk about how we solve the problem.
Well, I think I did indicate what we do like. We like having a mechanism for making sure that the contribution is made. We think that the contribution ought to be based upon what the actuaries tell us should be made, as they do with the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. I think those are very specific. We think that all of the systems ought to have all of the trustees elected by the participants in the plan. Those are the people who have the biggest stake in it, and we think that the IMRF is a good model. So those are some of the things that we think ought to be in the bill, and we indicated to that when we met in the Blandick building, and we'll be glad to come in and sit down with you and go over them in more detail, and there may be other areas that are not included in this framework that we could talk about as well, and we'd be glad to do that.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.